Hi, I'm Zara. Last Tuesday morning, I walked into my parents' kitchen holding a stack of bank statements that told a story they never wanted me to tell. 10 years, $127,000, and countless sleepless nights later. My father looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not our daughter anymore. Pack your things." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My mother nodded, sipping her coffee like she was agreeing to change the channel. But what they didn't know, what neither of them saw coming, was that I'd been preparing for this moment longer than they'd been using me. The rain in Portland has a way of making everything feel heavier than it should. Tuesday mornings especially. When the sky hangs low and gray, pressing down on the neighborhoods of Gresham like a damp blanket nobody asked for. I sat in my Honda Civic outside the house I'd been financially supporting for a decade, watching water droplets race each other down the windshield. The engine ticked as it cooled, and somewhere in that rhythmic sound, I found the courage I'd been building for months. The manila folder on my passenger seat contained everything. Bank statements printed on crisp white paper, each one highlighting transfers that had become as routine as breathing. March 2014, $800 for Dad's truck payment. June 2015, $1,500 for Mom's dental work. October 2017, $3,000 for Derek's legal fees after his second DUI. The pattern was there, clear as day, documented in blue ink and electronic timestamps. 10 years of my software developer salary flowing directly into their problems while my own life waited in the margins. I grabbed the folder and stepped into the drizzle. The pathway to their front door was the same cracked concrete I'd walked as a child. But now, each step felt different. Heavier. Final. The welcome mat still read the Hoffmans in faded burgundy letters, though I wondered if that plural still included me. The door was unlocked, as always. Small-town trust mixed with the assumption that I'd keep showing up no matter what. The familiar smell hit me immediately. Coffee grounds and something sweet. Maybe cinnamon rolls warming in the oven. It should have felt like home. Instead, it felt like walking into a museum of my own financial sacrifice. "Zara, honey, you're early," Mom called from the kitchen without looking up from her crossword puzzle. Patricia Hoffman had perfected the art of multitasking disappointment. She could solve 7 across while simultaneously ignoring the elephant in the room, which in this case was her 29-year-old daughter who'd been bankrolling their lifestyle since college graduation. Dad emerged from the living room, remote control in hand, wearing the same flannel shirt he'd had for 3 years. The one I'd bought him for Christmas, along with everything else under their tree that season. Vincent Hoffman moved with the slow deliberation of a man who'd convinced himself that everyone else's urgency was optional. "What's got you looking so serious?" he asked, settling into his recliner like he was preparing for a weather report, not a reckoning. I placed the folder on their coffee table, right next to Mom's ceramic mug collection that I'd been gradually filling with gifts over the years. Each piece represented another month of my paychecks disappearing into their comfort, while my own apartment remained furnished with secondhand everything. "We need to talk," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I'd practiced this moment in my car, in my shower, during late-night walks around my neighborhood when sleep wouldn't come, but actually standing there, folder in hand, felt surreal. Derek chose that moment to wander downstairs, hair sticking, up in directions that defied physics, wearing yesterday's clothes. My older brother had perfected the art of looking permanently surprised by responsibility, as if bills and consequences were weather patterns he couldn't predict. "What's the meeting about?" he mumbled, heading straight for the coffee pot. Even hungover, Derek possessed an impressive ability to sense tension and immediately try to dilute it with casual deflection. "It's about this," I said, opening the folder and spreading the first few statements across the table. The numbers stared back at us, black and white and undeniable. It's about 10 years of me paying for everything while pretending it was temporary. The silence that followed was different from their usual dismissive quiet. This one had weight. Mom's pen stopped moving across her puzzle. Dad's thumb stopped clicking the remote. Even Derek paused mid-sip, coffee cup hovering near his lips, like he'd forgotten how drinking worked. "Zara, sweetie," Mom began, her voice taking on that practiced tone she used when she needed something, but wanted to make it sound like affection. "You know we appreciate everything you've done." "Do you?" I asked, pulling out a highlighted statement. "Because this shows I paid your mortgage for 8 months last year. 8 months, Mom, while I ate ramen noodles and canceled my Netflix subscription to save $20. Dad shifted in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "We were going through a rough patch. The construction market was slow." "The construction market has been slow for 5 years, Dad. But somehow Derek's gambling debts always get priority treatment." Derek's head snapped up. "Hey, that's not fair." "Isn't it?" I pulled out another statement. This one from 6 months ago. $3,000 to pay off your poker losses, Derek. $3,000 that could have gone toward my student loans, which, by the way, I'm still paying while funding everyone else's mistakes. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in to witness a conversation that was 10 years overdue. Mom folded her crossword puzzle, a sure sign that she was shifting into defensive mode. She had tells, little habits that telegraphed her emotional state as clearly as road signs. "We never asked you to sacrifice anything," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. We all knew that wasn't true. The asking had been subtle, woven into family dinners and holiday conversations, disguised as temporary help that somehow became permanent expectation. "You didn't have to ask," I said. "You just assumed. Every time Derek messed up, every time Dad's work dried up, every time you wanted something you couldn't afford, you looked at me, the reliable one, the one who wouldn't say no." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, the screen displaying a balance that should have been much higher after 10 years in tech. "Want to know what my emergency fund looks like? Want to see how much I have saved for my own future?" The numbers weren't impressive. While my college friends had been buying houses and taking vacations, I'd been operating as a one-person bank for the Hoffman family. My retirement account was embarrassingly small. My savings were non-existent. At 29, I had less financial security than I'd had at 22, despite earning a 6-figure salary. "That's not our fault," Derek said, finally finding his voice. "Nobody forced you to help." "You're right," I said, and watched surprise flicker across his face. "Nobody forced me. I chose to help because I thought family meant something. I thought temporary meant temporary. I thought eventually someone would say thank you, or maybe even offer to pay me back." Dad cleared his throat, a sound that used to signal he was about to dispense wisdom, but now just sounded tired. "Zara, family doesn't keep score." "Doesn't it?" I asked, spreading more papers across the table. "Because it seems like you keep very good score of what everyone owes you. Derek owes you nothing, apparently, despite living here rent-free for 2 years. But I owe you endless support because I'm successful." The word successful tasted bitter. Success was supposed to mean freedom, security, the ability to build your own life. Instead, it had become a chain that tied me to their problems, their expectations, their casual assumption that my money was our money while their problems remained exclusively theirs. Mom stood up, moving toward the kitchen window like she could find answers in the gray morning light. "You're being dramatic, Zara. We're family. We help each other." "When?" I asked. "When do you help me? When Derek needed bail money, where was my help? When I was working 80-hour weeks to cover your mortgage and mine, where was your concern? When my relationship with Aaron fell apart because he couldn't understand why I was financially tied to my parents' poor decisions, where was your support?" The mention of Aaron hung in the air like smoke. They'd never liked him, thought he was too demanding, too critical of our family dynamic. What they'd failed to understand was that Aaron had been the first person to point out that I was being used. He'd been the one to suggest I was enabling rather than helping, and when I'd chosen them over his ultimatum, he'd walked away. "Aaron was wrong for you anyway," Derek mumbled, but his heart wasn't in the deflection this time. "Aaron saw what I was too afraid to see," I said. "He saw that you don't respect me. You love me, sure, but you don't respect me. I'm just a resource to you, a solution to problems you won't solve yourselves." Dad's face was reddening, the way it did when he felt cornered. Vincent Hoffman didn't handle confrontation well, especially when he couldn't argue with the facts. "That's not true, and you know it." "Is it?" I asked, pulling out the most recent statement. "Last month, you borrowed $2,000 for Mom's car repair, but then Derek posted pictures from Vegas on Instagram. Same weekend. Same $2,000, I'm guessing." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Mom's hand fluttered near her throat, a nervous gesture she'd had since I was little. Derek stared into his coffee cup like it contained escape routes. Dad's jaw worked soundlessly, caught between denial and admission. "We can explain that," Mom finally said. "I'm sure you can," I replied. "You've gotten very good at explaining. What you haven't gotten good at is changing, or appreciating, or taking responsibility." I stood up, gathering the papers back into their folder. The documentation felt heavier now, loaded with the weight of spoken truth. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'm done being your ATM. I'm done pretending this arrangement is normal or healthy. I'm done sacrificing my future for your comfort." "What does that mean?" Dad asked, but something in his tone suggested he already knew. "It means no more. Money. No more bailouts. No more covering your bills while you cover Derek's mistakes. It means I'm going to start living my own life with my own money." Derek laughed, but it sounded forced. "Good luck with that. You'll be back. You always come back." "Will I?" I asked, looking at each of them in turn. "Because it seems like you're pretty confident that I need you more than you need me. Let's test that theory." Mom moved away. From the window, her face pale. "Zara, honey, you're upset. Let's all calm down and talk about this rationally." "I am calm, Mom. I'm calmer than I've been in years. This is what rational looks like. This is me finally doing math that makes sense." I walked toward the door, folder tucked under my arm like armor. The house felt different now, like a place I was visiting rather than somewhere I belonged. The family photos on the walls seemed to watch me leave, frozen moments of a dynamic that had slowly poisoned itself over years of unspoken resentment and unexamined assumptions. "Where are you going?" Dad called after me. I turned back, hand on the doorknob. "I'm going to live my life, Dad, the one I put on hold to fund yours." The rain had intensified while I was inside, turning the world soft and blurry. I sat in my car for several minutes, engine running, heat warming my hands around the steering wheel. Through the kitchen window, I could see them still sitting there, probably trying to figure out how serious I was, how long this rebellion would last. They didn't know that I'd been planning this conversation for months. They didn't know about the separate bank account I'd opened, the direct deposit changes I'd already made, the financial advisor I'd been meeting with to repair the damage 10 years of family funding had done to my future. They didn't know that I'd already started apartment hunting in downtown Portland, looking for a place that would be mine alone, furnished with things I chose rather than inherited obligations. They didn't know about the job offer I'd received from a tech company in Bend, a mountain town 4 hours away where nobody knew the Hoffman family history. Most importantly, they didn't know that their response to this conversation would determine everything that came next, because while I'd decided to stop funding their lifestyle, I hadn't yet decided whether to stay in their lives at all. I pulled Away from the curb, windshield wipers working steadily against the Portland rain. In my rearview mirror, the house looked smaller somehow, less significant. For the first time in 10 years, I drove away from a family gathering without leaving, money behind. The feeling was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in a decade, whatever happened would be my choice, funded by my money, built on my terms. The rain continued to fall as I headed back toward my apartment, back toward a life that was about to become completely my own. Behind me, the Hoffman family was probably discovering what it felt like to solve their own problems. I was about to discover what it felt like to finally put myself first. 3 days passed without a word from Gresham. No calls, no texts, no unexpected visits with manufactured emergencies that required immediate financial intervention. The silence felt strange, like waiting for thunder after lightning that never came. I kept checking my phone during meetings at work, half expecting Derek's name to pop up with some crisis that only my credit card could solve. Instead, I found myself staring at my banking app with a different kind of fascination. For the first time in years, my checking account balance stayed the same from day to day. No mysterious transfers, no quick loans that became permanent arrangements, no watching my paycheck disappear before I could even consider what I might want to spend it on. Friday evening, I drove to my favorite coffee shop in the Pearl District, a place called Brew Haven that I'd discovered during one of my rare solo outings. The barista, a college-aged girl with purple streaks in her hair, smiled when she saw me approach the counter. "The usual?" she asked, already reaching for a medium cup. "Actually," I said, surprising myself, "I'll take a large today, and one of those almond croissants." It was a small indulgence, maybe $5 total, but it felt revolutionary. For years, I'd ordered small coffees and skipped the pastries, unconsciously budgeting for other people's problems even in my personal treats. The croissant was buttery and perfect, and I ate it slowly while scrolling through my laptop, not working. For once, just existing in a space that was mine. That's when I saw it. Derek had tagged me in a Facebook post, something he rarely did unless he needed something. The notification made my stomach tighten with familiar dread, that Pavlovian response to any communication from my family. I clicked, it expecting some passive-aggressive plea disguised as humor. Instead, I found a photo of Derek at some restaurant I didn't recognize, arm around a girl I'd never seen before. Both of them were laughing, drinks in hand, the kind of expensive cocktails that came with elaborate garnishes and price tags to match. The caption read, "When your girl wants the fancy place but you're feeling generous. Some people think money can't buy happiness, but they've never had bottomless mimosas at brunch." The timestamp showed yesterday, Thursday. 2 days after our kitchen confrontation, Derek was buying rounds for dates at upscale restaurants. I stared at the photo, watching other people's comments roll in. Heart emojis, jokes about Derek finally growing up, compliments on his apparent new relationship. I clicked on his profile, something I hadn't done in months. The scroll revealed a pattern I'd been too buried in my own guilt to notice. Casino nights with friends, concert tickets, shopping trips to Nike outlets, weekend getaways to the coast. All recent, all expensive, all happening while I'd been covering his share of household expenses and his periodic crisis payments. My coffee grew cold as I kept scrolling. A group trip to a Trailblazers game last month, tickets that cost at least $60 each. A new gaming setup in his room, equipment that must have run close to $1,000. Photos from bars. I knew charged $15 for cocktails, restaurants where appetizers started at $18. Derek wasn't struggling. Derek was living better than I was. I opened my own Instagram, neglected for months because I'd had nothing worth posting. My last photo was from 6 months ago, a sunset view from my apartment balcony with a caption about finding peace in simple moments. Before that, a picture of a book I'd been reading, then another sunset, then a coffee cup from this same shop. My social media presence looked like someone who couldn't afford a life worth documenting. Meanwhile, Derek's looked like a lifestyle blogger with a trust fund. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app, starting a new document. The title came automatically: Derek's Expenses versus Reality. For the next hour, I screenshotted and cataloged, cross-referencing dates with my own bank records. The pattern wasn't just obvious, it was insulting. March 15th, Derek posts about a weekend in Cannon Beach. March 18th, I transfer $800 to cover his car insurance and phone bill because he's between jobs. April 3rd, Derek shares photos from a friend's birthday party at a trendy rooftop bar. April 5th, Dad calls asking for help with Derek's portion of groceries and utilities. May 20th, Derek tags himself at a Timbers soccer match, clearly with season tickets. May 22nd, Mom mentions that Derek is really struggling and could use help with his student loan payment. Each entry made my chest tighter. I'd been subsidizing his entertainment budget while he performed poverty for sympathy. The worst part wasn't even the money, though that stung plenty. The worst part was how easily they'd all accepted the story that Derek was the struggling one, while I was the successful sister who could afford to help. I was successful, but success doesn't mean unlimited resources. It doesn't mean your own goals become optional. It definitely doesn't mean you should live like a monk while funding someone else's social life. My phone buzzed with a text from Isla, my friend from college who now worked as a graphic designer downtown. Drinks tonight? I know you're usually busy with family stuff, but thought I'd ask. I stared at the message, realizing how often I'd said no to Isla's invitations. How many happy hours I'd skipped, how many birthday dinners I'd missed, how many opportunities for friendship I'd sacrificed to be available for the next Hoffman family crisis. Isla had stopped asking as frequently over the years, and I couldn't blame her. Yes, I typed back. Where and when? 2 hours later, I sat across from Isla at a wine bar in the Alberta district, nursing a glass of Pinot Noir that cost more than I usually spent on an entire dinner. Isla was telling me about her latest client, a local band that needed album artwork, and her enthusiasm was infectious. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, mid-sentence. I've been talking nonstop. How are you? How's the family situation? The question hit differently now. For years, I'd fielded that inquiry with vague responses about everyone doing fine, keeping the financial details private out of some misplaced sense of loyalty. Tonight, with Derek's restaurant photos fresh in my memory, the truth felt easier. Actually, I said, I think I've been getting played. Isla's eyebrows rose. Played how? I told her about Tuesday's confrontation, about the bank statements and the decade of transfers. I told her about Derek's social media lifestyle and the disconnect between his public life and his supposed financial struggles. I even told her about Aaron, about how he'd seen problems I'd been trained to ignore. Isla listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of recognition. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and shook her head. Zara, she said, I've been wondering about this for years. Wondering about what? Why you never had money for anything fun. Why you always seemed stressed about finances despite having a great job. Why you'd cancel plans last minute because of family emergencies. She took a sip of wine. I thought maybe you had some medical situation you didn't want to talk about, or massive student loans or something. The realization hit me like cold water. My friends had noticed. They'd been watching me live like someone on a tight budget while knowing I earned enough to live comfortably. They'd probably drawn their own conclusions about my priorities, my choices, my character. How obvious was it? I asked. Pretty obvious, Isla said gently. But we figured if you wanted to talk about it, you would. Everyone has financial stuff they're private about. I thought about all the invitations I'd declined, all the experiences I'd missed, all the relationships that had grown distant because I couldn't participate in normal social activities. I'd been living like someone with limited resources while actually having plenty, just not for myself. "Can I ask you something?" Isla continued. "When's the last time you did something expensive just because you wanted to?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't. Not recently. Not in the past year, certainly. Maybe not in the past several years. Every purchase went through the same mental calculation. Can I afford this after the next family crisis? Is this worth risking my ability to help when they need it? "I bought a croissant today," I said finally. A croissant. A $5 croissant. And I felt guilty about it. Isla laughed, but not unkindly. "Zara, honey, you make more money than most people our age. You should be able to buy a croissant without guilt. You should be able to buy lots of croissants. You should probably own a house by now." The house comment stung because it was true. While my college friends had been accumulating equity and building net worth, I'd been treading water financially, impressive salary notwithstanding. I'd convinced myself that helping family was more important than building wealth. But what if family wasn't actually helpless? What if they were just comfortable with me being the solution? We talked until the wine bar closed, and for the first time in years, I didn't check my phone once for family emergencies. No one called. No crises materialized. The world continued spinning without my financial intervention, just like it probably had been for months or years without me realizing it. Saturday morning, I woke up with a clarity that felt almost chemical. I made coffee and opened my laptop, creating a new spreadsheet that I titled, "The Real Numbers." I wanted to see exactly how much money had flowed from my accounts to theirs, broken down by year, by recipient, by stated purpose versus actual use. The data was worse than I'd imagined. Over 10 years, $127,000 had transferred from my accounts to various Hoffman family needs. But when I cross-referenced the dates with Derek's social media activity and my parents' actual lifestyle changes, a different picture emerged. They weren't struggling. They were comfortable. They were comfortable because I was struggling. Derek's car payments that I'd covered for 8 months? His car was 2 years newer than mine. The dental work I'd funded for Mom? She'd gotten cosmetic improvements, not emergency care. Dad's periods of no work consistently coincided with hunting seasons and fishing trips that somehow always fit into his schedule. I'd been subsidizing their hobbies, their comfort, their ability to live beyond their means without consequences. They'd positioned themselves as victims of circumstances, while I'd positioned myself as their safety net, and somewhere along the way, the safety net had become the primary support system. My phone rang. Mom's contact photo filled the screen, a picture I'd taken of her last Christmas, smiling beside the tree I'd helped fund. I let it go to voicemail, then immediately played the message. "Hi, honey. It's Mom. We haven't heard from you since Tuesday, and we're a little worried. Derek mentioned that you seemed upset about some money thing, but I'm sure we can work it out. Dad's truck payment is due Monday, and we're hoping you can help out this month. Things are still tight. Give me a call back, okay? Love you." The casual dismissal of Tuesday's confrontation as some money thing made my hands shake. The immediate request for more money, delivered in the same breath as concern for my well-being, felt like a slap. But what really got to me was the assumption. Not a question, not a request exactly, just an expectation delivered with the confidence of a decade of compliance. I didn't call back. Instead, I spent Saturday documenting everything I could find. Bank records, social media posts, text message threads asking for money, receipts I'd saved from their various emergencies. I organized it all chronologically, creating a timeline that showed the difference between their stated financial situation and their actual lifestyle. Sunday evening, I drove to Gresham, but not to their house. I parked outside Derek's favorite bar, a place called Murphy's Pub, where he'd tagged himself dozens of times over the past year. It was busy for a Sunday, full of people watching football games on multiple screens, The kind of place where drinks weren't cheap but weren't unreasonable. I didn't go inside. I just sat in my car and watched, feeling like a private investigator, on a case I was both solving and living. Around 8:30, Derek emerged with 3 friends, all of them laughing, all of them looking exactly like people who'd spent the evening buying rounds without worrying about the cost. He climbed into his car, the one I'd helped him keep when he couldn't make payments. The monthly payment I'd covered wasn't because he couldn't afford it. It was because he'd rather spend his money on other things, knowing I'd handle the responsible stuff. I followed him home, staying far enough back to avoid detection. He pulled into the driveway of our parents' house, music still playing loud enough that I could hear the bass from the street. The front windows were lit, suggesting everyone was still awake, probably watching whatever Sunday night show they'd gotten hooked on. For a moment, I considered going inside. I could walk through that front door and pretend Tuesday had never happened, accept Mom's dismissal of my concerns as a money thing, nod along when they explained why Derek needed help this month. I could slip back into the familiar rhythm of being the family ATM, the reliable daughter who always came through. Instead, I drove home and spent the evening researching financial recovery strategies for people who'd been supporting family members. The internet was full of advice about setting boundaries with relatives who had substance abuse problems or gambling addictions, but less helpful for situations where the family wasn't necessarily addicted to anything except your money. Monday. Morning, I opened a new savings account at a different bank, one where my parents had no knowledge or access. I set up an automatic transfer to move 75% of my paycheck into the new account immediately upon deposit. Whatever was left in my original checking account would have to cover my actual expenses, which would force me to budget for my own life instead of theirs. The move felt simultaneously practical and rebellious. For the first time in 10 years, the majority of my money would be protected from family emergencies, real or manufactured. If they had genuine crises, they'd have to prove it and ask explicitly, rather than assuming my wallet was always open. Tuesday arrived, exactly 1 week after the kitchen confrontation. I'd been expecting some escalation, some response to my failure to call Mom back or help with Dad's truck payment. The silence from Gresham felt ominous, like pressure building before a storm. At lunch, I got my answer. My phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize, local area code but not stored in my contacts. I answered cautiously. Zara, this is Dr. Hendricks from Providence Medical Center. Your mother is here in the emergency department, and she asked me to call you. My stomach dropped. This was it, the emergency I'd been unconsciously waiting for, the crisis that would prove I was horrible for cutting off financial support. Mom was hurt, maybe seriously, and here I was playing accounting games instead of being available for my family. What happened? I asked, already mentally calculating how quickly I could get to the hospital. She came in with chest pains this morning. We've run some tests and everything looks fine. No heart attack, no cardiac issues. Appears to be anxiety-related. But we wanted to keep her for observation for a few hours. She's asking for you. Relief and suspicion warred in my chest. Chest pains were serious, anxiety or not. But the timing felt convenient. Exactly 1 week after I'd drawn financial boundaries. Still, if Mom was in the hospital, I needed to be there. I left work early and drove to Providence, my mind racing through scenarios. Maybe the stress of our confrontation had triggered genuine health problems. Maybe I'd pushed too hard too fast. Maybe Derek was right, and I'd be back, because family emergencies didn't care about spreadsheets and boundary setting. The emergency department was busy, full of people with varying degrees of medical crisis. I found Mom in bed 12, looking pale but alert, Dad and Derek flanking her sides like concerned guards. She smiled weakly when she saw me approach. "Oh, honey, I'm so glad you came," she said, reaching for my hand. I was so scared. "What happened, Mom?" Dad answered before she could. "She woke up with chest pains this morning. Couldn't breathe right. We thought it might be a heart attack." The doctor said it's anxiety, Derek added, but his tone was accusatory, like anxiety was somehow worse than cardiac arrest because it implied psychological rather than physical causes. I sat down in the plastic chair beside Mom's bed, genuinely concerned despite my suspicions. Anxiety attacks could be serious, terrifying experiences, even if they weren't physically dangerous. Are you feeling better now? A little, Mom said. But Zara, I think this whole thing with you being upset has been weighing on me more than I realized. I've been so worried about our family falling apart. There it was, the pivot from medical crisis to emotional manipulation, delivered with perfect timing and just enough vulnerability to make me feel guilty for setting boundaries. I recognized the pattern now, could see the script we'd been following for years without me realizing it. Mom, I said carefully, anxiety attacks are scary, but they're often triggered by underlying stress. Maybe we should talk about what's really causing the stress. What's causing stress is you acting like we're strangers, Derek said. Mom's been worried sick about you cutting us off. I haven't cut anyone off, I replied. I've stopped automatically paying for everything. That's different. Dad shifted uncomfortably. The doctor mentioned that financial stress can trigger these kinds of episodes. Maybe we all need to sit down and figure out a better system. A better system. Not an apology for 10 years of assumptions. Not acknowledgement that maybe I'd been carrying too much financial weight. Just a better system for extracting money from my accounts. I looked at Mom, pale against the hospital sheets, and felt my resolve wavering. We can talk, I said finally. But not here. Let's focus on making sure you're okay first. Mom squeezed my hand. I knew you'd understand, honey. Family is what matters. I stayed until the doctor discharged her, helped get her settled at home, made sure she had her anxiety, medication and instructions for follow-up care. Throughout the afternoon, I felt the familiar pull of guilt and responsibility, the old pattern reasserting itself like muscle memory. But driving home that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed a performance. The timing was too perfect, the pivot from medical crisis to financial reconciliation too smooth, the assumption that I'd resume funding their lifestyle too confident. Mom's anxiety might have been real, but the cause wasn't me setting boundaries. The cause was the possibility that their primary source of financial support had finally wised up to being used. They weren't worried about our family falling apart. They were worried about their income stream drying up. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't transfer money after a family crisis. I went home, ordered Thai food that I didn't feel guilty about buying, and spent the evening researching what financial independence actually looked like for someone who'd spent a decade funding other people's lives. The number was staggering. If I'd been investing that $127,000 instead of spending it on family emergencies, if I'd been putting the money toward my own retirement and goals, I'd be on track to retire early, to own property, to build wealth instead of just earning income. I'd been trading my future for their present, and they'd been so comfortable with the arrangement that they'd never even questioned whether it was fair. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning while I was reviewing code for a client project. The sender was Nathan Cross, the financial advisor I'd contacted the week before. His subject line read, "Financial Recovery Consultation, Your Assessment Results," and something about the formal tone made my pulse quicken. I'd met Nathan through a recommendation from Isla, who'd used his services when she started her freelance design business. He specialized in helping people rebuild their financial foundations after major setbacks, whether from divorce, medical bills, or in my case, a decade of funding other people's lives. Ms. Hoffman, the email began, "Thank you for providing such detailed documentation of your financial history. I've completed my analysis of your situation and would like to schedule a follow-up appointment to discuss your options. However, I wanted to give you some preliminary numbers that might help frame our conversation." What followed was a breakdown that made my chest tight. If I'd invested the money I'd given my family over the past 10 years, assuming conservative market returns, I'd currently have approximately $200,000 in assets. Instead, I had roughly $15,000 in retirement savings and practically nothing in liquid investments. The good news, Nathan continued, is that your earning potential and age mean you can recover from this setback. The challenging news is that continuing current patterns would likely result in long-term financial instability, particularly given your lack of accumulated wealth relative to your income level. I printed the email and read it 3 more times, each pass making the reality sharper. I wasn't just behind where I should be financially. I was dangerously behind, living paycheck to paycheck despite earning enough to be building serious wealth. At 29, I should have been looking at house purchases and investment portfolios. Instead, I was starting from zero because I'd been functioning as an unpaid loan officer for my family. That afternoon, I scheduled the follow-up meeting with Nathan for Friday. Then I did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I called Aaron. His number was still in my phone, though I'd resisted the urge to reach out since our breakup 8 months ago. The relationship had ended over exactly this issue, my inability to prioritize our future together over my family's immediate financial needs. He'd given me an ultimatum that felt impossible at the time: choose building a life with him or continue funding my family's lifestyle indefinitely. I'd chosen family. He'd chosen to leave. The phone rang 4 times before he answered, his voice cautious when he saw my name. "Zara, is everything okay?" "Hi, Aaron. I know this is weird, but I wanted to call and tell you that you were right." A pause. "Right about what?" "About my family, about the money situation, about everything you tried to tell me that I wasn't ready to hear." Another pause. Longer this time. "What happened?" I gave him the abbreviated version. The confrontation, the social media discoveries, the fake emergency at the hospital, the financial advisor's assessment. Aaron listened without interrupting, and I could hear him processing the information in real time. "How are you feeling about all of this?" he asked finally. "Angry. Stupid. Like I wasted 10 years of my life enabling people who don't even respect me enough to be honest about what they were doing with my money." "You're not stupid, Zara. You were loyal. There's a difference." The kindness in his voice made my eyes water. "I should have listened to you. I should have seen what you were seeing." "Maybe. But you weren't ready then. It sounds like you're ready now." We talked for another 20 minutes, catching up on his work, his life, the ways things had changed since we'd last spoken. He was dating someone new, a teacher he'd met through friends. He sounded happy, settled in a way that reminded me of what I'd given up when I chose my family's financial needs over our relationship. "Aaron?" I said before we hung up. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For not seeing clearly enough to choose us." "I'm sorry too," he said. "I wish I'd been more patient. But Zara, I couldn't watch you disappear into their problems anymore. You deserved better than that." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling the weight of paths not taken. Choices that had seemed necessary at the time, but looked increasingly foolish in retrospect. Aaron had seen what I was becoming before I'd seen it myself. He'd tried to save me from a situation I hadn't even recognized as problematic. Friday morning, Nathan's office was located in a sleek downtown building that made me feel underdressed despite wearing my best blazer. His assistant offered coffee while I waited, and I accepted gratefully, needing something to do with my hands while my stomach churned with anticipation. Nathan turned out to be younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of calm competence that probably served his clients well during financial crises. His office was decorated with charts and graphs that somehow managed to look hopeful rather than intimidating. "Zara," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk, I want to start by saying that your situation, while challenging, is absolutely recoverable. You're young, you have excellent earning potential, and most importantly, you've recognized the problem and taken steps to address it. He opened a folder thick with printouts and spreadsheets. Let's talk about where you are now versus where you could be, and then we'll discuss strategies for getting there. The next hour was simultaneously devastating and encouraging. Devastating because seeing the numbers laid out so clearly drove home just how much of my financial future I'd sacrificed. Encouraging because Nathan had concrete strategies for recovery that didn't require living like a monk for the next decade. The key, he explained, is aggressive savings now that you've eliminated the family drain on your resources. You're essentially 10 years behind, but you have 35 years until retirement to catch up. It's doable, but it requires discipline and commitment to your own financial goals. He showed me projections assuming different savings rates. If I could save 40% of my income for the next 5 years, then level off to a more sustainable 25%, I'd still be able to retire comfortably. It would require lifestyle changes, but nothing as dramatic as the financial sacrifices I'd been making for family. What about emergency funds? I asked. What if my family has a genuine crisis? Nathan's expression grew serious. Zara, based on what you've told me and the documentation you've provided, your family has been having convenient emergencies for 10 years. Real emergencies are rare. Manufactured emergencies designed to maintain financial dependence are unfortunately common. He pulled out another chart. Let's look at the pattern of their requests. Notice how they cluster around times when you might have extra money? Your bonus periods, tax refund season, months when you might otherwise be building savings? I studied. The timeline and the pattern was obvious once he pointed it out. Their emergencies coincided suspiciously often with my periods of financial strength, almost like they were monitoring my account balance and timing their needs accordingly. The hard truth, Nathan continued, is that continuing to provide financial support to family members who are capable of supporting themselves doesn't help them grow or become more responsible. It enables dependency and prevents them from developing their own financial skills. I left Nathan's office with a comprehensive financial recovery plan and a new perspective on what helping family actually meant. Real help would involve encouraging independence, not perpetuating dependence. Real help would mean saying no to manufactured emergencies and yes to genuine growth opportunities. The plan was aggressive but achievable. Maximize my 401k contributions, open a Roth IRA, build an emergency fund that was actually for my emergencies, and start investigating real estate investment opportunities. Most importantly, maintain absolute discipline about not funding family lifestyle choices disguised as temporary setbacks. That weekend, I started implementing immediately. I opened the Roth IRA online, set up automatic transfers that would move money into savings before I could be tempted to spend it elsewhere, and began researching financial independence strategies. For the first time in years, I was planning for my own future instead of just reacting to other people's crises. Sunday evening, my phone rang. Mom's contact photo filled the screen, and I felt the familiar tightness in my chest. But this time, instead of anxiety about what emergency awaited, I felt something closer to irritation. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom. Zara, honey, how are you feeling? Better, I hope. The question was clearly a reference to my supposed emotional state that had caused her anxiety attack. As if I'd been the one having a breakdown rather than finally standing up for myself. I'm feeling great, actually. Really clear about things. Oh, good. Listen, Derek's car broke down today, and the repair estimate is pretty steep. We were hoping you could help out with getting it fixed. You know how hard it is for him to get to job interviews without reliable transportation. There it was. The next emergency, delivered with perfect timing and familial guilt. Derek's job interviews, a detail that sounded suspiciously convenient. given his recent social media activity showing plenty of recreational outings. "What's wrong with the car?" I asked. "Something with the transmission." "The mechanic says it needs to be rebuilt or replaced. It's going to be about $3,000. $3,000. The same amount I'd just committed to investing in my Roth IRA this year. The same amount that Nathan had shown me. Could grow to over $10,000 by retirement if invested properly. "Mom, Derek just posted pictures from a Timbers game yesterday. Season tickets aren't cheap. If he can afford soccer games, he can afford car repairs." A pause. "Honey, those tickets were a gift from a friend." "Were they? Or is Derek prioritizing entertainment over transportation, assuming I'll cover the practical stuff?" "Zara, you're being awfully suspicious. Derek is really struggling. Right now." "Is he? Because his Instagram suggests otherwise. When's the last time Derek actually went to a job interview?" Another pause, longer this time. "That's not the point. The point is that family helps family." "You're right, Mom. Family does help family. But help means encouraging independence, not enabling dependence. If Derek needs car repairs, Derek can figure out how to pay for car repairs. So you're just going to let his car sit broken in our driveway?" "I'm going to let Derek handle Derek's responsibilities, just like I handle mine." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Mom cycling through various emotional strategies. Guilt about family loyalty, concern about Derek's future, reminders of all the times they'd helped me as a child, suggestions that I was being selfish and cruel. None of it worked the way it used to. Every argument she made reminded me of Nathan's charts, of Aaron's warnings, of the pattern I'd finally learned to recognize. This wasn't about Derek's transportation needs. This was about maintaining the financial dynamic where my money solved their problems. "Mom," I said finally, "I love Derek, and I love you and Dad. But I'm not going to keep sacrificing my financial future for people who are capable of handling their own expenses. Derek is 31 years old. If he can't figure out how to pay for car repairs, that's a problem that money won't solve." "Fine," Mom said, her voice shifting from pleading to cold. "Don't help, but don't expect us to come running when you need something." The threat was supposed to scare me, I think. The implication that family support was transactional, that my access to their love and assistance depended on my continued financial contributions. Instead, it clarified something I'd been struggling to understand. When had they ever come running when I needed something? When I'd been working 80-hour weeks and barely sleeping, had they offered to help with my laundry or grocery shopping? When Aaron and I broke up, had they provided emotional support? Or just assumed I'd have more money available for their emergencies? When I'd been stressed about work deadlines, had they ever suggested I should focus on my career instead of their problems? The answer was no. The support in our family flowed in one direction only, from my bank account to their needs. I'd been paying for the illusion of family closeness while actually growing more isolated and financially vulnerable every year. "You know what, Mom? I think I'll be okay." I hung up and immediately blocked Derek's number, then Mom's, then Dad's. Not permanently, but temporarily, while I figured out how to have a relationship with them that didn't revolve around my wallet. They'd been training me for 10 years to respond to their emergencies with immediate financial solutions. It was time to retrain all of us. The next few days were surprisingly peaceful. No urgent calls about crises that required immediate money transfers. No texts with Venmo requests disguised as casual family communication. No checking my account balance obsessively to make sure I had enough cushion for the next manufactured emergency. Instead, I had lunch with Isla, who was excited to hear about my financial recovery plan. I researched apartments closer to downtown, places that cost more than my current rent, but were still affordable now that I wasn't funding 3 other adults. I even looked at vacation packages, something I hadn't done in years. Thursday evening, I was cooking dinner in my apartment when someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my building had decent security, so unannounced visitors were unusual. I looked through the peephole and saw Derek standing in the hallway, hands shoved in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. I opened the door but didn't invite him inside. "How did you get up here?" "Followed someone through the main door. We need to talk." "Do we?" "Zara, come on. This whole thing has gone too far. Mom's been crying for days, Dad's barely speaking to anyone, and my car is still broken. Can't we just go back to how things were?" How things were. Derek's version of normal was me paying for his mistakes while he lived consequence-free. His version of family harmony was my financial stress funding everyone else's comfort. How things were wasn't working for me, Derek. It was working fine. Everyone was happy. Everyone except me. I was broke, stressed, and falling behind on building my own life. But I guess my happiness wasn't part of the equation. Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know maybe I took advantage sometimes, but you make good money and we're family. Isn't helping family what you're supposed to do? Helping, yes. Being a permanent ATM, no. $3,000 isn't going to kill you. It's not about the $3,000, Derek. It's about the pattern. It's about 10 years and $127,000. It's about me being 30 years old with no savings because I've been covering everyone else's poor financial decisions." Derek's face went blank. $127,000? That's how much I've transferred to various family members over the past decade. Want to see the spreadsheet? He stared at me like I'd started speaking a different language. I had no idea it was that much. Because you never bothered to think about it. You just assumed I could afford it, so it didn't matter. "Zara, I'm sorry. I really didn't realize how much you'd been helping." For a moment, I felt hope. Maybe this conversation would be different. Maybe Derek was capable of growth and genuine appreciation. Maybe we could rebuild our relationship on more honest ground. "The thing is," Derek continued, "even if you've helped a lot before, this car situation is really urgent. I've got a job interview next week, and without transportation, I'm going to miss it. Can't you help just this once more, and then we'll figure out a better system?" The hope evaporated. Derek hadn't heard anything I'd said about patterns or enabling or financial recovery. He'd heard dollar amounts and apologetic words, but the conclusion was still the same. He needed money. I had money. Therefore, I should give him money. "No, Derek." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no. Figure out your own transportation. Take the bus, borrow a car from a friend, rent something, get a ride share. Handle it yourself." "Come on, Zara. Don't be like this." "Like what? Like someone who expects adults to solve their own problems?" Derek's expression hardened. "Fine. When this family falls apart because you decided money was more important than relationships, remember that this was your choice." He left without saying goodbye, and I watched him walk down the hallway toward the elevator. Through my window, I could see him get into Dad's truck, which meant Dad had driven him over for this guilt trip attempt. They'd planned this intervention, together, assuming that face-to-face manipulation would work better than phone calls. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my couch, feeling oddly lighter despite the confrontation. For the first time in 10 years, I'd said no to a family financial request and stuck to it. Derek's car would remain broken until Derek figured out how to fix it. Their emergency was not my emergency. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Probably Derek using someone else's phone since I'd blocked his. "You've changed. This isn't who you used to be." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "You're right. I used to be someone who paid for other people's mistakes. Now I'm someone who invests in her own future. I like this version better." I blocked the unknown number and finished my wine, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt proud of myself, not guilty, not anxious about family consequences, not worried about emergencies I'd have to fund. just proud of finally choosing my own financial well-being over their comfort. The next morning, I transferred another $1,000 into my new savings account and scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent. It was time to stop talking about building wealth and start actually doing it. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, delivered to my work address in an elegant cream envelope with my name written in calligraphy across the front. Inside, gold-embossed lettering announced the Portland Tech Women's Annual Gala, celebrating achievements in innovation and leadership. The event was scheduled for Friday evening at the Nines Hotel downtown, with cocktails, dinner, and a keynote speaker who'd built a multi-million-dollar app from her garage. What made my hands shake wasn't the formal invitation itself, but the handwritten note attached. Zara, we'd be honored to have you as our featured speaker on financial independence and career advancement. Your story could inspire so many women facing similar challenges. Please consider sharing your journey with us. Best regards, Miranda Chen, Event Coordinator. They wanted me to speak about financial independence, about overcoming challenges. They had no idea that my biggest challenge had been my own family, or that my journey toward financial independence was barely 2 months old. But somehow, word had gotten out about my situation. Maybe through Isla's network, maybe through professional connections, maybe through the tech community grapevine that somehow always knew everyone's business. I stared at the invitation for several minutes, my mind racing through possibilities. This wasn't just an opportunity to share my story. This was an opportunity to control the narrative, to speak my truth in a room full of successful women who might understand the unique pressures of being the family ATM. But it also meant going public with details I'd kept private for years. It meant acknowledging that the successful software developer everyone knew had been living paycheck to paycheck because she'd been funding her parents' lifestyle and her brother's entertainment budget. It meant admitting that I'd been financially irresponsible in the name of family loyalty. I called Miranda that afternoon, my heart pounding as I dialed the number on her business card. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and professional. "Miranda, this is Zara Hoffman. I received your invitation to speak at the gala." "Zara, I'm so glad you called. I hope you'll consider it. Your story about breaking generational financial patterns could be incredibly powerful for our audience." Generational financial patterns. The phrase made me pause. "Can I ask how you heard about my situation?" "Actually, it was through Aaron Blake. He mentioned that you'd recently made some major changes in how you approached family financial support, and he thought your experience might resonate with other women who struggle with similar dynamics." Aaron. My ex-boyfriend had recommended me as a speaker about financial independence, knowing that my story involved choosing money management over family expectations. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering our relationship had ended because I'd chosen family financial support over building a future with him. "Miranda, I should be honest. My financial independence journey is very recent. I'm not sure I'm qualified to give advice to other people." "That's exactly why you're the right person," she replied. "Most financial speakers talk about strategies and theories. You can talk about the emotional reality of making difficult choices. Sometimes the most powerful stories come from people who are still figuring it out." We talked for another 20 minutes, and by the end of the conversation, I'd agreed to speak for 15 minutes about recognizing financial enabling patterns in family relationships. Miranda would send me some guidelines about the audience and format, but she emphasized that personal authenticity was more valuable than polished presentation skills. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring out at the Portland skyline, processing what I'd just committed to. In 4 days, I'd be standing in front of a room full of professional women, talking about the most embarrassing and painful aspects of my financial life. I'd be admitting that I'd been financially manipulated by my own parents, that I'd enabled my brother's irresponsibility, that I'd sacrificed my own future for people who didn't even respect my sacrifices. But maybe that was exactly what needed to be said. Maybe there were other women in similar situations who needed to hear that it was okay to say no, that family loyalty didn't require financial self-destruction, that choosing your own economic well-being wasn't selfish. That evening, I started outlining my speech. The introduction would be simple, establish my credentials as a tech professional and my background as someone who'd been supporting family members financially. Then I'd walk through the pattern recognition process, how I'd discovered the disconnect between my family's claimed financial struggles and their actual spending habits. The middle section would focus on the emotional manipulation tactics, the manufactured emergencies, the guilt-based appeals to family loyalty. I'd share specific examples like Derek's social media posts showing expensive entertainment while claiming poverty, like Mom's anxiety attack timed perfectly with my decision to set financial boundaries. The conclusion would be about recovery and boundaries, about the difference between helping family grow and enabling family dependence. I'd talk about working with a financial advisor, about the real cost of family financial support, about the importance of investing in your own future even when other people make you feel selfish for doing so. Wednesday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, all from various members of my extended family. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through the notifications. Aunt Linda, Cousin Jessica, Uncle Mike, even my grandmother's neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who somehow had my number. The messages were variations on the same theme. Your parents are worried sick. Derek told us what's happening. This isn't like you. Family is forever. Don't let money ruin your relationships. Derek had apparently launched a campaign, reaching out to every relative with a phone to inform them that I'd abandoned my family over money issues. He'd positioned himself and my parents as victims of my sudden selfishness, painting a picture of financial hardship caused by my withdrawal of support. The manipulation was masterful, actually. Instead of admitting that they'd been financially dependent on me for years, Derek had flipped the narrative. Now I was the problem, the ungrateful daughter who'd turned her back on family in their time of need. The relatives who barely knew the details of our financial arrangements were responding with predictable outrage. I scrolled through the messages, each one making me angrier. These people had no idea what they were talking about. They didn't know about the $127,000, the manufactured emergencies, the social media evidence of Derek's actual lifestyle. They'd been given a story designed to make me look heartless, and they'd accepted it without question. But what bothered me most wasn't their judgment. It was the realization that Derek had calculated this response, had anticipated that I might stand firm on my boundaries, and had prepared a nuclear option. He'd weaponized our extended family against me, counting on their ignorance of the real situation to pressure me back into compliance. I turned off my phone and drove to work, but concentration was impossible. Every few minutes, I'd think of another relative who might be receiving Derek's version of events, another person who might be judging me based on incomplete information. By lunch, I was ready to call the whole family and explain myself, to defend my choices and provide documentation of why I'd been forced to set boundaries. Then I remembered something Nathan had said during our consultation. The people who benefit from your poor financial boundaries will always try to pressure you back into old patterns. They'll use guilt, manipulation, and social pressure. Because those tactics have worked before. The key is remembering that you don't owe anyone an explanation for taking care of your own financial well-being. I didn't owe them explanations. I didn't owe them access to my bank accounts or my financial decisions. I didn't owe them the continued sacrifice of my future for their comfort. What I owed myself was the commitment to stick to boundaries I'd set for good reasons. Instead of calling my relatives, I called Miranda. I want to adjust my speech topic slightly, I told her. I want to talk about what happens when you set financial boundaries with family, the retaliation, the manipulation, the social pressure campaigns. That sounds even more valuable, Miranda said. A lot of women struggle with exactly that issue. Thursday evening, I practiced my speech in front of my bathroom mirror, timing each section and adjusting the flow. The personal details felt raw and vulnerable, but they also felt important. If I was going to do this, I wanted to do it honestly, without sugarcoating the emotional difficulty of choosing financial health over family approval. My phone had stayed off since Wednesday morning, but I turned it on briefly to check for any urgent work messages. The missed notifications had climbed to over 100. Text messages, voicemails, Facebook messages, even LinkedIn messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Derek's campaign had been thorough, but there was one message that stood out from the rest. It was from Aaron, sent Wednesday evening. I heard about the gala speech. I'm proud of you for sharing your story. Don't let them pull you back into old patterns. You've come too far to give up now. The message meant more than all the guilt trips combined. Aaron had seen what I was becoming before I'd seen it myself, and he was supporting my growth, even though our romantic relationship had ended. He understood what this speech represented, the courage it took to speak publicly about family financial manipulation. Friday afternoon, I left work early to prepare for the evening. I chose a navy blue dress that felt professional but not overly formal, paired with simple jewelry and comfortable heels. I wanted to look polished but approachable, successful but not intimidating. The Nines Hotel was buzzing with activity when I arrived, women in business attire networking over cocktails in the elegant lobby. I checked in with Miranda, who introduced me to several other attendees, and made sure I felt comfortable with the evening's schedule. My speech was positioned right after dinner, when people would be settled and attentive. During cocktail hour, I mingled with other women in tech, learning about their companies, their challenges, their successes. Several mentioned struggles with work-life balance, with imposter syndrome, with the pressure to prove themselves in male-dominated industries. But when the conversation turned to family expectations and financial pressures, I heard echoes of my own experience. My parents keep asking when I'm going to buy them a house, one woman confided. They say I'm being selfish, keeping all my success to myself. My brother assumes I'll pay for his kids' college tuition, another added. Because I don't have children of my own, he thinks my money should go to family. These weren't isolated stories. They were variations on the same theme I'd been living for 10 years. Successful women whose families viewed their earning potential as communal property, who were expected to sacrifice their own financial goals for other people's wants and needs. By the time dinner ended, I felt more confident about my message. This room full of accomplished women needed to hear that it was okay to prioritize their own financial well-being, that family loyalty didn't require economic self-destruction. Miranda introduced me with warmth and enthusiasm, highlighting my background in software development and my recent journey toward financial independence. As I walked to the podium, I could see faces turned toward me with genuine interest and curiosity. "Good evening," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I want to start by asking a question. How many of you have ever been told that your success comes with family obligations? That earning a good salary means you should help support relatives who make different financial choices?" Hands went up throughout the room, far more than I'd anticipated. The visual confirmation that I wasn't alone in this struggle gave me courage to continue. For 10 years, I believed that family loyalty meant financial sacrifice. I believed that my success was meant to be shared, that saying no to family financial requests was selfish and cruel. Tonight, I want to share what happened when I finally learned to distinguish between helping family grow and enabling family dependence. I walked through my story chronologically, starting with the gradual increase in family financial requests, and my assumption that temporary help would remain temporary. I described the pattern recognition process, the social media discoveries, the manufactured emergencies designed to maintain financial dependence. The hardest part wasn't setting boundaries, I continued. The hardest part was the retaliation. When I stopped automatically funding my family's lifestyle, they launched a campaign to make me the villain. They contacted every relative we had, painting me as heartless and greedy. They created a narrative where I was abandoning my family, in their time of need. I paused, looking out at faces that showed recognition and understanding. But here's what I learned. The people who benefit from your poor financial boundaries will always try to pressure you back into old patterns. They'll use guilt, manipulation, and social pressure because those tactics have worked before. The question is whether you're going to let those tactics continue working. The room was completely quiet, women leaning forward in their chairs, hanging on every word. I realized that many of them were living versions of my story, trapped in family, financial dynamics they didn't know how to escape. I worked with a financial advisor who showed me the real cost of family financial support. Over 10 years, I'd given my family over $100,000 while accumulating almost no wealth myself. I was living paycheck to paycheck despite earning a six-figure salary because I was funding other people's poor financial decisions. I shared Nathan's projections, the comparison between where I was financially versus where I should have been. I talked about the opportunity cost of family financial support, the retirement savings I'd missed, the wealth-building years I'd sacrificed. But the financial cost wasn't even the worst part, I continued. The worst part was the realization that my family didn't respect my sacrifices. They viewed my money as their safety net, my success as their entitlement. They loved me, but they didn't respect me. And love without respect isn't sustainable. I concluded with practical advice about setting financial boundaries, about the difference between genuine emergencies and manufactured crises, about the importance of investing in your own future even when other people make you feel guilty for doing so. Family loyalty doesn't require financial self-destruction, I said. Helping family members grow and become independent is loving. Enabling family members to remain financially dependent is not. You can love your family without funding their lifestyle. You can be loyal without being an ATM. The applause was immediate and sustained, with several women standing as they clapped. But more meaningful than the applause were the faces I could see, women who were clearly connecting with my story, who were perhaps recognizing their own situations in my words. After my speech, I was surrounded by women wanting to share their own experiences, to ask questions about boundary setting, to thank me for giving them permission to prioritize their own financial well-being. The conversations continued long after the formal program ended, with business cards exchanged and promises to stay in touch. That was incredibly brave, Miranda said as the evening wound down. I think you changed some lives tonight. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt proud of myself, not for achieving professional success or earning money, but for choosing my own well-being over other people's comfort. I felt proud of speaking truth that was difficult but necessary, of using my story to help other women recognize similar patterns in their own lives. My phone was still off, probably accumulating more guilt messages from relatives who didn't understand the real situation. But for the first time since this whole conflict began, I didn't care what they thought. I'd found my voice, told my truth, and discovered that I wasn't alone in struggling with family financial manipulation. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Isla, who'd been in the audience the night before. You were amazing. Lunch next week? I want to hear more about your recovery plan. Then another message, this one from a woman I'd met at the gala. Thank you for your speech. I'm meeting with a financial advisor next week because of what you shared. And finally, one more message that made me smile. Zara, I watched the live stream of your speech. I'm proud of the woman you've become. Aaron. I turned my phone back off and made coffee, standing at my kitchen window watching Portland wake up on a Saturday morning. Somewhere across town, my family was probably planning their next strategy for getting me back in line, their next emergency that would require my immediate financial intervention. But I wasn't the same person who would have responded to their manipulation with guilt and compliance. I was someone who invested in her own future, who set boundaries based on self-respect rather than family approval, who understood the difference between love and enabling. They'd lost their ATM, but I'd found my voice, and I was never going back to silence again. 6 months after the gala speech, I stood in the kitchen of my new condo in the Pearl District, watching the sunrise paint the Cascade Mountains gold through floor-to-ceiling windows. The space was twice the size of my old apartment, with granite, countertops I'd chosen myself, and appliances that had never been purchased to solve someone else's financial emergency. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every detail reflected my choices rather than inherited obligations. The coffee maker gurgled as it finished brewing, a sound that had become part of my morning ritual of intentional living. No rushing to check my phone for family crises, no calculating whether I could afford groceries after covering someone else's bills, no anxiety about what emergency would drain my account before payday. Just coffee, sunlight, and the quiet satisfaction of a life built on my own terms. My laptop sat open on the kitchen island, displaying the financial dashboard Nathan had helped me create. The numbers told a story of recovery that still amazed me. In 6 months of prioritizing my own financial goals, I'd accumulated more wealth than in the previous 2 years combined. My retirement account was finally growing at a respectable rate. My emergency fund contained actual money instead of optimistic intentions, and my investment portfolio was beginning to look like something that might actually fund a comfortable future. But the most significant change wasn't in my bank account. It was in my relationship with myself. The quiet confidence that came from choosing self-respect over family approval, from investing in my own growth instead of other people's comfort. My phone buzzed with a text from Miranda, the event coordinator, who'd invited me to speak at the gala. "Good morning! Hope you're ready for today's interview. The producer is excited to meet you." Today was the day I'd been both anticipating and dreading for weeks. A local television show called Northwest Women had contacted me through Miranda, wanting to feature my story as part of a series on financial independence and family relationships. The segment would air during their popular weekend program, reaching thousands of viewers across the Pacific Northwest. The invitation had come with both opportunity and risk. Speaking at the gala had been relatively private, contained within a room of professional women who understood complex family dynamics. Television would be different, more public, with the potential to reach people in my extended family who'd been fed Derek's version of events for months. But it also represented the chance to help women who were trapped in similar situations, who were funding family lifestyles while sacrificing their own futures, who needed permission to choose financial health over familial guilt. The producer had specifically mentioned wanting to address the unique pressures faced by successful women whose families viewed their earnings as communal property. I dressed carefully for the interview, choosing a burgundy blazer that photographed well under studio lights and projected professional competence without appearing intimidating. The goal was to look like someone viewers could relate to, successful, but approachable, confident but not arrogant. The drive to the television studio took me through neighborhoods I'd explored over the past few months, areas I'd previously avoided because I couldn't afford to live in them. Now, with my finances focused on my own goals rather than scattered across other people's problems, I was discovering parts of Portland I'd never allowed myself to consider. Cafes where I could work remotely, hiking trails I could access on weekends, cultural events I could attend without calculating the cost against family obligations. The studio was smaller than I'd expected, with that slightly worn elegance of local television production. The host, Janet Morrison, was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of warm presence that probably made guests feel comfortable sharing personal details on camera. She greeted me in the green room with genuine enthusiasm. "Zara, I'm so glad you agreed to do this segment. Your story resonates with so many women who feel trapped between family loyalty and personal financial health. I think our conversation could really help people who are struggling with similar dynamics." We spent 20 minutes discussing the format and key topics before moving to the set, a cozy living room arrangement with soft lighting designed to encourage intimate conversation. As the cameras rolled, Janet introduced the segment with statistics about women who support adult family members financially, highlighting the emotional and economic challenges of setting boundaries with relatives. My guest today is Zara Hoffman, a software developer who spent 10 years supporting her family financially before recognizing the difference between helping loved ones grow and enabling their dependence. Zara, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me, Janet. Let's start with the basics. How did you find yourself in a situation where you were financially supporting your parents and brother for a decade? I'd practiced this answer, focusing on the gradual nature of the situation and the emotional manipulation that made it difficult to recognize. It started small, Janet. A car payment when my dad was between construction jobs, help with medical bills for my mother, occasional assistance for my brother when he faced setbacks. Each request felt temporary and reasonable, especially since I was earning good money in tech. But temporary became permanent? Exactly. What I didn't realize was that my family had begun structuring their lives around my financial support. They weren't working toward independence, they were becoming more dependent. My success had become their safety net, which prevented them from developing their own financial responsibility. Janet nodded, her expression encouraging me to continue. When did you first recognize this pattern? I shared the story of confronting my family with bank statements, of discovering Derek's social media posts showing expensive entertainment while claiming poverty, of realizing that their emergencies conveniently coincided with my periods of financial strength. The details felt less raw now, more like case studies in financial manipulation than personal wounds. The turning point came when I worked with a financial advisor who showed me the real cost of family financial support. Over 10 years, I'd given them over $100,000 while accumulating almost no wealth myself. I was living paycheck to paycheck despite a six-figure salary because I was funding other people's poor decisions. That must have been devastating to realize. It was, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I understood why I felt so financially insecure despite earning good money. The problem wasn't my income, it was where my income was going. Janet asked about the emotional challenges of setting boundaries, and I described the retaliation campaign, the guilt-based appeals to family loyalty, the extended relatives who'd been recruited to pressure me back into compliance. I emphasized that the manipulation had been sophisticated and persistent, designed to make me feel selfish for choosing my own financial well-being. What would you say to women who are currently in similar situations? I'd say that family loyalty doesn't require financial self-destruction. Helping family members become independent is loving. Enabling them to remain dependent is not. You can love your family without funding their lifestyle choices. The interview continued for another 15 minutes, covering practical strategies for setting financial boundaries and the importance of distinguishing between genuine emergencies and manufactured crises. Janet asked thoughtful questions that allowed me to address common guilt triggers and manipulation tactics. As the cameras stopped rolling, Janet smiled warmly. That was excellent, Zara. I think you're going to help a lot of people who are struggling with exactly these issues. Driving home from the studio, I felt the familiar mix of vulnerability and empowerment that came from sharing difficult truths publicly. The interview would air in 2 weeks, giving my family time to discover that I'd gone on television to discuss our financial dynamics. The prospect of their reaction no longer filled me with anxiety the way it once would have. Their approval or disapproval of my choices had ceased to determine my sense of self-worth. That evening, I had dinner with Isla at a restaurant we'd been wanting to try for months, the kind of place I'd previously avoided because the prices seemed extravagant for someone constantly budgeting for other people's emergencies. We ordered wine, shared appetizers, and talked about everything except family drama. Isla was planning a trip to Italy for her graphic design work, and I found myself genuinely excited about her opportunities rather than mentally calculating whether I'd have enough savings left to handle any family crises while she was gone. You seem different, Isla observed over dessert. More settled, I guess. Less like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in a state of low-level anxiety about the next family emergency, the next guilt-inducing phone call, the next financial crisis that would require my immediate attention. I was living in the present, making plans for the future, investing in experiences that enriched my own life, rather than just solving other people's problems. The television segment aired on a Saturday morning while I was hiking in the Columbia River Gorge, something I'd started doing regularly since moving closer to downtown. The trail was challenging but manageable, winding through old-growth forest toward a waterfall that tourism websites claimed was worth the effort. I'd turned off my phone to focus on the physical challenge and natural beauty, knowing that whatever reaction the interview generated could wait until I returned to civilization. When I finally checked my messages that afternoon, my phone showed 63 notifications, text messages, voicemails, social media alerts, and emails from people who'd seen the segment. But instead of the family crisis communications I'd grown accustomed to, most of the messages were supportive. Colleagues from work congratulating me on speaking publicly about difficult family dynamics. Women I'd met at professional events thanking me for giving them language to describe their own situations. Former classmates sharing their own stories of family financial manipulation. Even strangers who'd somehow found my contact information to express gratitude for validation of their experiences. There were 3 messages from family members. Derek had sent a single text saying, "Really? Television?" with an eye roll emoji. Dad had left a voicemail asking me to call him when I had time to talk. Mom had sent a longer text expressing hurt that I'd shared private family information publicly, ending with, "I hope you're happy now." But mixed among the family disappointment were messages that reminded me why I'd chosen to speak publicly. A woman named Zara wrote that she'd been supporting her adult son for 5 years and hadn't realized she was enabling his irresponsibility until hearing my interview. Another viewer named Maria shared that she'd scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor after recognizing her own patterns in my story. These were the responses that mattered, the evidence that sharing my experience had created value for other women facing similar struggles. My family's disappointment was predictable and ultimately irrelevant to the larger purpose of helping people recognize financial manipulation and prioritize their own economic well-being. Monday morning brought an unexpected email from Elena Vasquez, the employment attorney Nathan had recommended when I'd first started setting financial boundaries. "Zara, I saw your television interview and wanted to reach out. I'm developing a workshop series for women on financial boundary setting with family members. Would you be interested in serving as a co-facilitator? Your combination of personal experience and professional success could be incredibly valuable for participants." The workshop opportunity represented another step in transforming my painful experience into purpose for others. Elena's practice served women who were navigating complex family dynamics while building careers, exactly the population that needed to hear messages about financial independence and boundary setting. I called Elena that afternoon, and we spent an hour discussing the workshop format and target audience. The sessions would be small, intimate groups of 8 to 10 women, focused on practical strategies rather than therapy or counseling. My role would be sharing my story and facilitating discussions about recognizing manipulation tactics and implementing financial boundaries. The goal, Elena explained, is to help women understand that they can love their families without funding their families. That success doesn't come with obligations to solve other people's financial problems. We scheduled the first workshop for the following month, giving me time to develop materials and prepare for the facilitator role. The work felt aligned with my values and experience, a way to channel my recovery journey into support for other women facing similar challenges. 3 weeks later, I received an unexpected phone call from Dad. His voice was quieter than usual, less confrontational than I'd anticipated given the television interview and months of minimal contact. Zara, I've been thinking about what you said on that show, about enabling and independence. I wanted you to know that Derek got a job last week, full-time, with benefits. He's been paying his own bills for the first time in years. The news surprised me. Derek had found employment and was handling his own expenses. The brother who'd spent years assuming I'd cover his responsibilities had apparently discovered the ability to be financially independent when my support was no longer available. That's great, Dad. I'm glad he found something. I think maybe you were right about some things. About us depending on you too much, expecting you to solve problems we should have handled ourselves. It wasn't a full apology, but it was acknowledgement. The first recognition from my family that my boundaries had been reasonable rather than cruel. Dad's admission that they'd become overly dependent suggested some level of self-awareness about the dynamic I'd finally chosen to exit. I appreciate you saying that, Dad. We miss you, though. The family doesn't feel the same without you around. I miss you too, I said, and meant it. But I don't miss feeling like my primary value to the family was financial. I don't miss being the solution to everyone else's problems while neglecting my own life. We talked for another few minutes, awkward but genuine, before ending with mutual expressions of love and hope for rebuilding our relationship on healthier ground. It wasn't reconciliation exactly, but it was progress, the beginning of a dynamic based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker on as Portland transitioned from day to night. My laptop was open beside me, displaying the financial dashboard that tracked my recovery progress. In 8 months of prioritizing my own goals, I'd accumulated more wealth than in the previous 3 years combined. My retirement projections showed a comfortable future, my investment portfolio was growing steadily, and my emergency fund actually contained money for my emergencies. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real transformation was internal, the shift from people-pleasing financial enabler to self-respecting woman who understood her own worth. I'd learned to distinguish between love and manipulation, between helping and enabling, between family loyalty and financial self-destruction. My phone buzzed with a text from one of the workshop participants, a woman named Rachel who'd been supporting her sister's family for years. Zara, I told my sister I couldn't pay her rent anymore, and she found a way to handle it herself. Thank you for showing me that was possible. These messages arrived regularly now, women who'd attended workshops or seen interviews sharing their progress in setting boundaries and prioritizing their own financial health. Each success story reinforced my decision to speak publicly about family financial manipulation to transform my painful experience into purpose for others. The mountain peaks were visible in the distance, snow-capped and serene against the evening sky. Tomorrow, I'd wake up in a home I'd chosen and furnished myself, drink coffee I could afford without guilt, and work on projects that advanced my career rather than just funding other people's lifestyles. I'd facilitate a workshop, helping other women recognize financial enabling patterns, continue building wealth for my own future, and live with the quiet satisfaction of choices made from self-respect rather than fear. My family had expected me to remain their financial safety net indefinitely, to sacrifice my own goals for their comfort, to prioritize their wants over my needs. Instead, I discovered that saying no to their demands meant saying yes to my own life. That choosing financial health over family approval led to both prosperity and peace. The girl who'd spent 10 years funding other people's mistakes was gone, replaced by a woman who invested in her own dreams, who understood that love without respect isn't sustainable, who knew that the most generous thing you can do for family members is refuse to enable their dependence. I'd lost an ATM relationship with my family, but I'd found my voice, my worth, and my future, and I'd never been happier to make that trade. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.